Hello folks, welcome to this webinar on developing a natural capital plan for Eastern England. We're just waiting for everyone to trickle in and then we will crack on. So we were talking just before about this, about how I should come up with some kind of funny anecdote and at least, do a bit of stand-up comedy or crack some jokes before we start rather than you staring at my face while we all wait. But sadly, I didn't prepare any.
It's a
Hi,
lesson
Jeff,
we can
welcome.
take forward for next time, Sam.
Exactly.
Hi, Sam.
Welcome to the webinar. We're just, people are pouring in pretty quickly, so I'm sure we'll hit a decent quorum in a minute and then we'll crack on. Hi there, Emma. Hello everybody, if you're just arriving and joining us, this is the 7th, I think, in the series of developing a natural capital plan for Eastern England, and rather excitingly, we're going to be showing some results to you today. So we'll have some exciting maps to look at, which who doesn't love a good map? I think we're starting to reach a decent number, so I will crack on. Is Robin joining us today, Nancy?
He is, yes. I'll look out for him, Sam, and I will promote him to panelist when he gets here.
Jolly good. So, just to introduce everybody, I think most of you know me by now. I'm Sam Sinclair, one of the directors of Biodiversify. We've got Nancy from Water Resources East, who is heading the controls. Robin Price will be with us in just a second, I suspect. We've got Emma Taylor from New Anglia LEP, who's going to give us a few words later on. Jeff is the guy just finding his seat. He is from the RSPV, and again, he'll be giving some thoughts. And we'll also be joined by Hugh some later on from Wild East. And I'll talk more about their role in a bit, but it's basically just to kind of talk a little bit about how they might use the plans talking about, and also tell us how they'd like to see us improve it. So they're there to sort of put a bit of context in this stuff, and also tell me what I have to do next to get it into a useful format. The kind of structure of this is I will bring you all up to speed on the plan for the first kind of probably take half an hour. Then we'll take a few questions. Then we'll hear something from our panelists, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to get your feedback. How we're going to use your input to make this better. Jeff and Emma, feel free to turn your cameras off if you like, but entirely up to you. Right, so hopefully most of you have been with us along what has turned out to be quite a long journey. So we started off by collecting information on your projects in October, and to be honest, I've been collecting, all kinds of information the whole way through. In November and December, we focused on collating objectives and actions, so describing, what is it you actually want from or for nature, and what are the steps that you think need to be taken in order to achieve these objectives. So we got a final list of those in early January, and then we turned our attention to targets. So, actually trying to quantify these actions and objectives, actually describe it in numerical terms what this shared vision for the landscape is. Since then, we've gone a bit quiet as we basically, CISO and Julia have been busily processing all the information you've sent us, finding an enormous pile of data to actually represent it all, and running the spatial prioritization, which means we're now, rather excitingly, in the last chevron, which is review the prioritization. And we'll now go through, this will be, obviously I'm showing the first iteration with you now, but we'll now be going through multiple iterations until we arrive at something that actually there's a kind of broad consensus about, actually, something that actually represents what everybody wants. So I'm going to give you a kind of whistle-stop tour of some of these details just to kind of remind you. And first, we're going to look at objectives and actions. So you guys submitted, I think it was 945 discrete objectives and actions, which is a lot. So I'm very, very grateful to you all for that. We've also received further objectives and actions since we had the first list. Those will be revisited now, basically, when we revise the plan, so they will definitely be included. If you haven't submitted actions and objectives, you actually still can. If you send it over, the details on the WRE website, then we will seek to include your inputs in the next iteration. So in order to make sense of all this, we grouped your objectives into the Natural England Natural Capital categories. Those are the ones on the left there. And I won't go into this into too much detail, but biodiversity came out as the most frequently selected category. But then there was a lot of interest in water and ecosystem services. So we went through and included those wherever possible. We also grouped the actions into the same natural capital categories. There were 5 clear priorities there. So biodiversity again, fantastically, but then also basically water, floods, and climate. We group these actions into zones. So the zones are conserve existing biodiversity, establish new areas of natural capital, establish new areas of natural capital, restore degraded natural capital, and manage productive landscapes in a natural capital or biodiversity friendly manner. One of the things that's really important to note here is these 4 categories are actually, they've come from your submissions. So the example I always give is if you were working in northern Scotland, you would not have a zone for established because you'd already have enough habitat that you wouldn't really be seeking to create more. Whereas obviously in Eastern England, there's a lot of opportunity for this. So actually established came out as the most frequently identified zone of actions that people have told us about. So subsequently, we've included it as its own specific zone. Now, to skip forward somewhat, what we've done is used a massive pile of we, again it's CISO and Julia, have done is used a long list of nationally available datasets, largely from Natural England, but there are a bunch of others as well, to identify where the actions in those zones can take place. And we've produced maps like this. So this is just one. This is a map for establish, and this identifies all the areas across Eastern England where you can potentially establish new areas of habitat. We've also done this for conserve and restore. However, manage we've put to one side, and we're going to deal with that slightly later down the process. A key part of systematic conservation planning is it seeks to identify where to act in order to achieve the outcomes in the most cost-effective way. And to inform that part of the analysis, we've produced essentially a heat map of the relative costs of different actions across Eastern England. So on the left is a map that is literally the cost per acre per year of taking farmland under production. I spoke about this a bit more in some of the other webinars, but in essence, we combined data from Natural England, which identifies the relative grade of agricultural land from low to high, with data from CEH, which identifies the current land use, whether it's arable or pastoral, and combined that with data that Knight Frank and Farmers Weekly produced, which tells us the relative cost of different grades of agricultural land in different parts of the country. So that gives us that. But we also found a very good resource which tells us the relative costs of maintaining, restoring, and establishing habitat in each different areas per unit area. And that's briefly summarized in the table on the right. And this is kind of important because obviously if you're going out and establishing habitat, you've got a very high startup cost as you're going out and planting trees and whatever it might be, doing all this lovely stuff. But then after a while, the costs are going to taper off as it starts to become more about maintenance than actually necessarily a kind of specific determined action. So we've included that in there as well to make sure it's actually considering the fact that these zones have different costs. We sought your targets, your guidance on setting targets. Again, there's a whole webinar about that, so I won't go into too much detail, but the main message we got was people want targets to be high. They wanted them to include ambitious goals for the whole of Eastern England. So that's what we've done. We used, and this is a bit where it starts to get interesting, this is new, we used your guidance to go through policy documents and set appropriate targets. So for conserve, we set to conserve existing good quality habitat at 80% using habitat network data, and we felt this was representative of a high proportion. For restore, we drew from the 25-year plan for the environment, which states an ambition of restoring 1 million hectares of habitat, which is 75%. So we went, great, we'll take the number 75%. This could potentially be run at different levels depending on what was needed. Establish, however, is a bit more complex because conserve and restore, we're just talking about proportions of the full potential. So, there's 100%, which is the potential we could restore, so it's a small proportion of that. Whereas establish is entirely new. You're creating something from scratch. So to guide this, we again looked to the 25-year plan for the environment, and that states an ambition of creating 500,000 hectares of new habitat. So proportionally, Water Resources East is 22.3% of the country. So proportionally, that's 115,000 hectares of new habitat. And actually, this is a bit conservative, to be honest, because I think there's a lot more opportunities for establishing habitat in Eastern England than there are in many other parts of the country. However, that said, it's still an extremely high target, and you'll see why in a minute. So this is a brief overview of the data that we used to turn those simple rules into actual numbers. So in the middle, you've got the potential for each of these habitats across all of Eastern England. So the potential for conserve essentially says how much good quality habitat do you have. The potential for restore says how much degraded habitat do you have. And the potential for establish essentially says where across Eastern England are there the right conditions for these habitats to exist, and therefore they could be created. And then the targets, the three columns on the right, are essentially us applying these simple rules to set numbers. Now, the thing that is critical to understand is that this is not us telling you what the target should be. This is us trying to use your guidance to set the most kind of basic targets we can, the most kind of unbiased, equal targets. What we're going to want from you is help refining this so it actually reflects what you want. And that's going to be the thing I'm going to talk about at the end of this webinar, is it's critical that we have your support and your feedback to help us tweak these numbers, move the dial so it actually reflects your collective vision for Eastern England. So these are not suggestions, this is merely us trying to kind of provide a baseline for you guys to work from. Oh, crikey. So this is the results for the conserve zone. So you get two results out of SCP. You get on the left the single best solution. So what is the single best way of achieving the targets for the conserve zone, so conserve existing habitat. And on the right you get selection frequency. And this is basically because the way it works is it asks the same question thousands of times. It runs the analysis thousands of times and identifies how frequently each planning unit, which is a parish, is selected as part of the solution. If it's black, that means it's selected every single time. It's critical, you have to have it. And if it's at the other end, at the kind of yellowy end, that suggests it was never selected, so it's not very important. And if it's purpley brown, purpley red, that means it's somewhere in the middle. That means it's, it's important. It can make a significant contribution to delivering your targets, but it's not essential. There are ways of achieving this elsewhere. And some stats down the middle there. The main one I think really to note is that this represents 2.4% of WRE, so it's quite a small area that actually has good habitat in it. And looking at the map, you can probably see some, Thetford Forest jumps out, for example. You might see areas you know. So this is a map for restore. So where would you act in order to restore degraded habitat across Eastern England? And this tells us a few different things. So in the selection frequency on the right, you can see that actually there's a few black areas, but mostly it's in the middle. And this tells us you've got a lot of choice. There's a lot of choice for where you act in order to achieve your targets. And it's going to be pretty evenly spread across the whole of Eastern England. There are a few black areas, but mostly you've got a lot of room to maneuver there. And then on the left, you've got the best fit solution. And there's a lot of areas that have been identified as important for have been selected specifically for their connectivity benefits. So, how do we start to turn the entirety of Eastern England into one large interconnected network? And this represents 1.5% of of Eastern England. Now, I'm going to move on to establish now, and I'd like you to bear in mind that when I mentioned the 150,000 hectares, I noted that it was quite a large number. And that's because you get this. So what this does not say is let's turn all of Eastern England into forest. What this says is, in order to achieve the goals of the 25-year plan for the environment, you will need to act in almost every parish across Eastern England. Actually, that's such an ambitious goal that you will need to act in many, many different places. And there isn't much choice about how you do that because it's so ambitious. And this, even though it does look like it's everywhere, actually it's 11.6% of Eastern England. So it's much smaller than it appears, although it is still a lot of work. And something I think is also really important to note is that collectively these three zones add up to 20% of WRE, which when you consider that the average amount of land managed for nature in a county in the UK is 16%, 20% actually doesn't seem terribly ambitious. That seems like something that actually could be achieved in 25, 30 years. I mean, just for example, Cambridge's ambition is to go from 8% to 16% in doubling nature. So actually 20% over a slightly longer period is, not that far out. So this on the left here is a map which basically combines the single best fit solutions for all of the zones, conserve, restore, and establish. So you can see there where for each parish, which actions or selection of actions the plan suggests would be optimal for delivering these targets. On the right, you can see a kind of quick overview of the types of costs, and we compared the Marksan, which is software that we use, analysis against a random analysis, which is basically a proxy for working with people we want to work with, people project-led rather than necessarily targeted actions. Although I do appreciate that projects do tend to be targeted. Now, in this, you'll notice that the Marksan's a bit more cost effective, but not enormously. And that, to be honest, is reflective of the fact the targets were so high that there wasn't really much room for maneuver. Marksan's kind of at its strongest when there is more choice, when your targets are a bit lower and you've got a lot of options. So the other bit of information that underpins this is we have all the data. We have all the natural England data that was used to inform this, used to kind of guide the spatial prioritization. So you can actually zoom in and see what actually needs the plan actually suggests to be done in different areas. So the map on the right, the zoomed in bit, has in the lime green, for example, indicates where you plant trees and riparian areas to prevent flooding. And then the pink and the kind of lighter blue are where you might establish coastal and reedbed habitats. Now, this is a bit of a funny bit of information because, and we're not kind of going to include it as standard because this is a regional plan. So the visions and the kind of the actions it suggests are providing a regional ambition. And actually, when you zoom into this kind of super fine detail level, the data doesn't always hold up so well. It's quite nuanced in how you interpret it. So I kind of share this with you because I think it's a really important thing to know, but we still haven't figured out quite how we're going to share this with you and how we're going to make this accessible and useful, which, funnily enough, is the topic of most of the rest of this talk. So I'm going to run now through some kind of key roles and purposes of this plan. So the first is, really importantly, that this plan illustrates a shared vision. It illustrates what we can achieve if we work together and push for a kind of shared ambition for Eastern England. And I think that's a really important thing to have. It also specifies how you can deliver cost-effective change. So how can you get what you want, but in the most cost-effective way? How can you, really make sure that your resources go as far as humanly possible? Critically, and Robin would murder me if I forgot to include this, it informs water resource planning. This is one component of a much wider spectrum of work led by Water Resources East, and therefore this is going to help them figure out how to change the paradigm of water management across this part of the country so that it benefits, amongst other things, natural capital and biodiversity. A really important part of this is it, I hope, will help it support the local nature recovery strategies. So these are county level plans for nature laid out by the Environment Bill. And I'll talk more about these in a second, but I think a key part of this regional plan is supporting those. It's also a really useful tool for facilitating conversations. I mean, if you're a large private sector entity, for example, looking to offset carbon or whatever it might be, um, this can provide incredibly useful shared language, shared understanding for speaking to other organisations, NGOs, county councils, farmers, whatever, and going, look, this is the kind of thing we want to do. How does this look? Can we start talking about these different types of actions suggested by the plan? Biodiversity net gain. So obviously, another important component of the Environment Bill is laying out the obligation for 10% net gain. And again, this plan will speak to that. So the establish and restore zones are key areas where you might cite biodiversity offsets, whilst the conserve zone essentially tells you where you should avoid impact, where you should seek to kind of minimize the extent to which you damage natural capital or habitats. Strengthening agri-environment applications. So kind of fundamental to all this, the whole point is really to get money in the hands of farmers in support of natural capital action. I think that's a completely critical part of this, and I very much hope that this will be useful in supporting farmers in making applications and justifying. Look, this plan has suggested these actions. I reckon I should take these actions on my land, and this is why basically DEF or whoever else should give me some money for it. I see that as being a clear and important role of this plan. I'll come back to that in a second, though. I've copied the same thing twice. What that's supposed to say is supporting local natural capital plans. So a key part of this is that obviously there's a lot of people working at the local level. I mean, just to provide some examples, catchment-based approaches, the catchment level plans developed by the Rivers Trust and a lot of their collaborators, a beautiful example of how important and how effective local communities can be at coordinating actions and delivering something really meaningful. And I see them as a critical user of this tool. They'll be able to hopefully pick this up and identify what are the important actions they might undertake in their parish or their catchment, and give them some guidance about where to go and how they might act. Ensuring effective delivery of ecosystem services. Right, so this is key. It was really obvious that actually clean, plentiful water, absence of flooding, resistance to drought, all this kind of stuff is going to be crucial for our economy. I mean, I'm reading the other day about the effect of the mild winters and the large numbers of aphids that they're having on crops. Well, a key part of this is we've used a lot of data on where to establish habitat in order to deliver these services. This then means that when you start to act, for whatever reason it might be, you're really maximizing the chances of getting these completely critical services to the places they need to go to. And then last, but absolutely not least, I rather hope this will be empowering to individuals, that actually people can pick this up and understand, on what they can do, how they can contribute with their garden or whatever it is. I think it would be missing a real trick if we don't make this something that is easily understood and that community groups can look at and understand and kind of use to kind of inform their actions. I think I've been having a lot of conversations recently about urban green spaces and urban natural capital, and I think that's a really important piece of this puzzle which we haven't unlocked yet. So what I'm going to do now is briefly talk through how I see different potential users using this plan, and then we'll move on to questions and we'll hear from our panelists. So I'm going to start with a farmer, how a farmer could use the plan, because like I said, really fundamentally, I see like one of the main purposes of this is to channel money into the hands of farmers to undertake natural capital action, or land managers, pardon me. And I think that, clearly that is something that will be mutually beneficial. So I think a core part of this is helping support funding applications. If you're submitting an application to whoever it might be, and you can go, look, this action I'm suggesting isn't just something I conjured out of nowhere. This is actually something this regional plan that's supported by evidence and draws on policy and all this kind of stuff has said is an important thing to have in my area. Therefore, I think this should be prioritized in terms of funding. I think it will also help identify what to do. I've spoken to a few land managers about this. I've been speaking to a few people just to kind of get initial reactions, and a couple of them have gone fantastic. Like, we're talking about planting trees on our land, and we have no idea where we can do it so it'll deliver the most benefit. So hopefully this will be an incredibly useful resource. If you have something like this is just something I conjured out of nowhere, but if you access the data that tells you in your parish what you might undertake, what has it been zoned for, this could be really useful. You might look at this and go, actually, I've got 2 hectares of degraded lowland fens on my land. I'll make that the core of my elm application. I shall contribute that small component of how this parish can be part of this larger vision. Critically, however, I very much respect the fact that it will take quite a lot of work to go from what we've got at the moment into something that is actually directly useful. And I am very open to having a lot of feedback and discussion and criticism and support about this. I see this in many ways, as I've always said. The first time you see the plan is kind of the start of the conversation. And I think this particular aspect is going to require quite a lot of discussion. How can the private sector use the plan? So clearly, natural capital is essential for the long-term viability of large parts of the economy. Everyone's aware of this. This is no surprise to anyone anymore. And I keep hearing, people keep telling me how much interest there is in natural capital investment. This is a growing interest in people wanting to spend money on strengthening this aspect of our society. And I feel like one of the strengths of this plan is its cost effectiveness. It means you can turn around to an airplane company, cool, looking to offset its carbon. You could use this to go, look, here is where, if you wanted to do this at home in Norfolk, this is where you would focus on peat and wetlands or whatever to offset your carbon in the most cost effective way. It allows you to make a kind of business case essentially. Also provides basis for negotiating and collaborating. If you're a large airline and you want to speak to farmers about restoring peat, that's probably going to be quite new ground. You're probably going to need some support on that. And if you have this map as a form, to base that discussion around, I think that'll be extremely powerful. How can county councils use a plan? So, like I said, the local nature recovery strategies are a key part of the Environment Bill. So these are county level plans for nature and natural capital. So we're actually currently working with DEFRA on 3 of the 5 pilots, and the LNRS process is extremely similar to the systematic conservation planning process. In fact, the only difference is that the data collection bit happens in stage 2 rather than in stage 5. It's slightly switched around. So there's a lot of parallels here. And one of the key things about this is that, whilst you have your county boundaries, the systems of nature and water operate at the landscape scale. A deer has no idea when it's in Norfolk or Suffolk. So understanding this wider system is going to be really critical for helping counties connect their ambitions across borders, whether that's establishing a wildlife, establishing a connected network of nature across the whole of eastern England, or whether that's dealing with the fact that, if you're downstream of Cambridgeshire, you're going to have to talk to them about how they manage their natural capital in order to make sure that you have the clean, plentiful water that you require. And I think this plan is going to be a key tool for facilitating those discussions and coordinating activities. It also provides a basis from which to kind of launch. So one of the key things we've learned in the pilots is that for a lot of people, this is really new ideas. This is a really big new idea that they will not have encountered before. And actually just kind of conceptualizing what it can look like is really hard, which is totally reasonable. I often tell this anecdote. The first 6 months of my PhD was me trying to define what systematic conservation planning was, and I never really succeeded. It took me ages to get my head around what it actually is and what it can actually do. And I think that having a plan like this gives you a really good basis to point at it and go, look, that's something that we might like to model in some ways. Of course, there'll be things that you like and dislike and would want to do differently, but it gives you a good starting point. Right, last one. How do NGOs, LEPs, and other regional organisations potentially, how can they use the plan? So, obviously, to achieve this bold ambition, it's going to require a lot of different types of projects. This isn't going to be a kind of one-size-fits-all thing. This is going to require a very adaptive, multi-headed approach. As a key part of that, the plan can help identify areas with strong potentials. I mean, gosh, I've been on quite a few conversations already this week about people talking about projects and where they might target them. And having a resource which can allow you to go, okay, cool, here is a place that I can restore wetlands, for example, that I am going to be pretty highly confident that this is going to deliver important outcomes. That's a really helpful resource, I hope. They can also be used to help identify shared interests. So, if there are areas that you're interested in from a biodiversity perspective, but also provide important ecosystem services, well, again, that helps identify where, actually the interests of a LEP, an NGO, and a county council converge. And actually, there's strong potential for working together and combining the strengths of different types of regional organizations. And again, the funding applications. I'm sorry to keep banging on about this, but obviously the money is important. And I really hope that they can then, use this justification for why these things are important to help indicate that actually they're drawing on the best available science as we have to produce this plan to make sure that the applications are coherent and logical and strong and robust. Right. The last thing I have to say on this, which is important, which is we're in the middle of producing a beautiful glossy document that details everything in this talk, which will be coming out. Well, we're literally with the designers right now, so it'll be out probably Thursday, if not Friday. So you will have an opportunity to go through and pore through this stuff in more detail and look up your parish and all that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, shall we take a couple of quick questions before we move on to the... Robin, would you like to say a few words?
No, I was just going to help manage some questions that have come in, Sam, if that's okay. I'll say a few words in a moment. But I noticed that Katie Thornborough had her hand up. Sorry, Katie, you had your hand up a little while. Did you want to? I don't know if we can unmute you. Yeah, I think we can add you as a panelist and maybe to ask your question live, Katie. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Katie.
Oh, yes. I've got 3 questions. You talk about delivering cost-effective change, which is great to see, but I'm also very interested in delivering carbon-effective change. We've got most of the local authorities and the government have committed to reducing carbon, and I know the work within our natural environment is a very good way to do that. So, really good soil helps with carbon sequestration, and we know we have massive carbon loss through peat loss. So it would be great if we had data on carbon effectiveness for making decisions about how we can restore the landscape. That's one question. The next question, what about opportunities for restorative farming? I think there are quite many more farmers are interested in that now, and this could, rather than just giving the farmland over to great opportunities to restore nature, what about much better farming techniques? And finally, will there be a public consultation? I think there's a bit of confusion about whether there will or won't. I thought there was a public consultation coming out, but I'm hearing concern from some residents in Cambridge that there won't be. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sam, you do the first 2 and I'll do the last one. How about that? Thank you very much, Katie. Really great questions. Thank you. So carbon effectiveness as well as cost effectiveness, Sam, how could that be? That's incredibly sensible thinking, isn't it? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that? I think you're muted, Sam.
Hello?
Hello?
Sorry. We are all over carbon. So there's a specific target in there for carbon storage, which can be raised if that's a particular interest or importance. A lot of the actions that this plan suggests are specifically so that the overall outcome is achieving this carbon target. So that is a core part of this plan, is seeking to kind of achieve that as one of the important ecosystem services. I think you also raise an important point, though, which is sometimes someone might have a specific target they wish to achieve. Someone might be interested in carbon specifically, for example. And I think this is something we are thinking about a lot in terms of how to make this plan as accessible and as useful as possible. I think one of the key aspects is going to be thinking about how people who have specific interests might be able to use it. I mean, you can always talk to us, but I appreciate there might be other ways of doing that. In terms of farming, yes, absolutely. So one of the zones that we wanted to include eventually is manage. So this would be manage farmland in a biodiversity friendly manner, because we absolutely recognise the importance of this, as has been noted in some of our previous webinars, that farming can provide a really important habitat for a lot of species, as well as, of course, being a critical part of our economy and the food we eat. So that's definitely something to include. What we've found so far is that a lot of the stakeholder input we've had, which, as you know, is extensive, has suggested that the main link to farming is about water and about water management. And so I'm the nerd and thought a lot about how to deal with this. And we decided actually probably it was best to deal with this part of the wider WRE planning process, because it's such a clear link to water. So we're still in the middle of multiple of these processes, figuring out how we'll do that. But we kind of saw that as an opportunity to link the SCP to some of the other planning processes in a kind of coherent manner.
And just on consultation, Katie said all of this work is available on WRE's website. All of the recordings from all of the webinars that we've run, all of the data, literally the spreadsheet down to individual objective, all 945 objectives are listed on the WRE website. So everything of this, all of this is very transparent in terms of this work. And today is the next stage in that process. This project runs to the end of June. I wonder whether you're thinking around kind of WRE's regional plan and the regional kind of integrated water resource management plan for the region. Now that will be, we've got a series of events running as WRE in the autumn of this year, which will be our co-creation events, thinking around kind of the need for large infrastructure. There's some of the stuff that's coming out of our modelling work. So we'll be running a whole series of planning conferences, which everyone will be, again, very open invitations to. And then WRE's regional plan will be submitted will be sent out for public consultation in January 2022. And ready for the next draft, which will be August 2022. So those are our kind of big milestones. So again, we're trying to do this in absolute, no complete transparency. That's hugely important to us. So the website has got all of this information so far, everything that's been told. And then in terms of WRE's regional plan, then we'll be sending out comms in terms of our planning conferences fairly shortly and getting invitations. But January 2022 is a very important moment when things will be published for public consultation. Thank you. A couple more questions. To go through. Here's a good one. How on earth, Sam Sinclair, do you establish 912 hectares of ancient woodland? Thank you, John Pennell, for that. So how does that work for ancient woodland?
So there's a few things here. It's possible you were looking at conserve. I can't quote off the top of my head. I'd have to check. But because I asked this question as well, it's partly because ancient woodland is defined as a makeup of species rather than necessarily having ancient trees in it. So there are limited opportunities for creating what is technically ancient woodland, even though it's not in terms of its age. So that's how you establish areas of it. I thought it was smaller than that, but I can't quite remember without the numbers in front of me.
Again, and I'm sure I was a moment or so late joining. I'm sure that Sam, the purpose of today's webinar is a real bit of tire kicking. This is the opportunity to kick the tires and ask exactly this sort of question. For something that really doesn't make sense, how on earth can you do that? There isn't, this is the stage we're at now of this. Here's the data, here's some assumptions, here's what's gone into it. Now over to you to kick the tires, and does it make sense to kind of all of your
Well, and on that note, we're actually going to have a poll in a minute about it, but there is an opportunity to have what I've given you as a sort of brief overview, but I'm aware that there's a lot of people out here who are experts in various components of this, and something we've discussed within the team is the potential for CISO and Julia, or Doctors Barossa and Hayward, to give a presentation on the technical stuff behind this and actually go into the nitty-gritty and the detail, which is to be entirely frank, way beyond my understanding. It's just starting to get into real, they've used 180 data layers or whatever it is, and why and how they connected it. And if people would be interested in that, then we could do that. We'll have a poll to kind of gauge interest later on, because it's pretty intense. But I appreciate there are some experts out there who are going to want to do that. So I'd like to make the opportunity for them to do so.
It's really helpful sound again. It helps the continued urge for transparency. So good question from Tim Darby from the East Suffolk Water Abstractors Group around kind of, and it's quite a similar question from Arthur the Gate from South East Midlands LEP, in terms of kind of how can you start splitting this? Can you start splitting this by catchment areas, in terms of the, to support the Environment Agency kind of mapping? How can you work to, to local authority level, district council level? Obviously you've got lots of parishes, but how do you then aggregate this up and draw different GIS layers around it? It's simply another GIS layer.
So this is an important question. So one of the first decisions we made was about whether to use catchments or parishes as the planning unit, and this is a classic SCP choice. And basically, a catchment makes more sense from an ecological perspective, but a parish makes more sense from an administrative perspective. We decided, as counties were identified as critical for decision making, that we would use parishes. So sadly, that means we can't rerun this to identify it at catchments. That said, we are literally in the middle of scoping some work to figure out how to use this to inform catchment level plans. So this is a really important topic, and we recognise that, and kind of watch this space. We'll come back to you when we figured it out.
Brilliant, thank you. Question from Nicholas Berthold from Natural England. What's DEFRA's view of this?
I love this question.
Where they've taken, what in terms of where are we in terms of the thinking around Elm applications, etc. You've highlighted this as an opportunity of potential use, but where are DEFRA on this?
Yeah, so this is great. So if you look at the policy document they released on Elm last summer, 2 years ago, not sure, a while ago, most recent Elm policy paper, it specifically mentions the use of spatial prioritization in there. Spatial prioritization is the name of the analysis that underpins this. That's this thing that's produced these maps. And there's also a spatial prioritization team at DEFRA. Now, of course, they are still very much figuring out what they're doing, and I certainly couldn't speak as to what direction they're going to take. But there has been considerable interest in this. And there is also, this kind of links back through the local nature recovery strategies, because those are going to be a key delivery mechanism for ELM. And of course, we're trialing the use of SCP as part of that. So I think this is very much an emerging picture, but I see multiple routes for this to support ELM applications. Yeah, so essentially, I think there are plenty of opportunities, and we'll have to I'm doing my best to make sure that happens, and we'll have to see kind of how this pans out, but that's certainly my intention.
Lots of conversations happening with DEFRA around this from WRE and from yourself, Sam, and others, absolutely.
Yeah, it's such a live space. It's impossible to say anything too definitively because there's so much going on.
At the moment, absolutely. Question from Andrew Alston, who's a farmer in Norfolk, and a farming consultant. As an arable farmer on Grade 1 soil, I want to see my environmental neighbours managing their land use much better before I consider degrading the value of my land. So, how do we ensure the environmental neighbours manage land to soil, water, and targets? So, how can this? Yeah, what sort of conversations could this spark at local level?
So, I guess there's a few components in here. I think that one of the critical tools for translating this into these local level action are either the catchment level plans or the county level plans. I think that would be a really important means to get towards this, or indeed parish plans if there are communities that would like to do that. I'm not sure I fully understand about degrading your land. Not sure I fully understand enough about why you would do that to talk about it with any authority. I think in terms of how do we ensure people do it, I think the key is making money available, basically. It's as simple as that. I see this plan as being a key tool for providing resources from offsets, ELM, natural capital investment, anything I can shake out this to channel money to make it available for helping people improve their management to meet these standard targets. So that would be my response to that, I think.
Okay, more thought to, yeah, there's more plenty of discussions to be had. But the whole point of this, Sam, is of course this isn't the answer. This is a primer for discussion at various scales, isn't it? That's the really important point, isn't it? This is an opportunity to bring people through. This isn't right. There we are. Off you go now. We'll leave it with
no. This is
go forth and create or whatever.
Well, and this is a really important point that I don't want it to at all give the impression that I'm glossing over this. So actually, and if you have very kindly set up a kind of workshop for me to speak to some farmers next week about this, so I'm sure we're going to grill the pants off me about all of this. And I'm very keen to work with people who know far more than me about this in terms of how to make this something that will be useful. How do you make it so it's actually going to translate into money or action or support or evidence or whatever it is that people would actually like? And this is not something I know very much about, so I'm very much open to being told what does and doesn't work and what people wouldn't like to see.
Yeah. Wonderful. This is a tricky question from a lady called Rachel Dyson, who's from Waterford East. She's on the thing. That's what she's asking difficult questions, Rachel. But no, it's an excellent one. So, what's the plan for the system for keeping the plan live, so we can see that actions are undertaken are delivering the impacts? We design priorities are kept updated. So, and we'll deliver as feedback on actions, or will the plan be rerun at regular points in time? It's a great question around the future of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a really good question, and again, one I don't fully know the answer to. Normally, I would see plans like this being revised every 3 to 7 years. I think that's a really important thing to do. I think from previous conversations, what I would like to see is this to be revised after the local nature recovery strategies, so the county level plans have been developed. I think once they develop it and they understand, what they want to do at those counties, that will then give them the evidence to actually kind of revise this based on what they've said. It may be that this is made redundant by those, but I don't think so. I think this will provide important regional vision for how you coordinate across the area. So I've just noticed that Hugh's joined us, and he has a limited time because he has an extraordinarily busy diary. So I think possibly if we can come back, we'll have more time for questions in a minute.
Great. Okay, we'll come back.
I think, yeah, they'll all get answered. That's partly why we allowed 2 hours, because I know how many questions we get. So please keep asking them in there. But I think what we'll do now is move on to the panelists. So what I've asked people to talk about is briefly, how might they see this plan being used? How might they use it, or how might they see it being used in their circles? But then also the second question is what would they like to see done to make it more useful? What haven't we done yet that we could do? What should we be focusing on to make sure that we actually get something really practical out of this? Hugh, if I could ask you to talk first, would that be okay? You might have to unmute yourself, etc.
Hang on. Hello, everybody, and yeah, so thank you to you, Sam and Robin, for inviting me to this forum. And I suppose, if the reason we've been so kind of impressed and keen to work with Water Resources East, but in particular your work at Biodiversifies, is that when we started Wild East, it was absolutely, and I think the term is pretty well established on our website and in our media, of talking about a map of dreams, and we're not ashamed of the fact that, having been farmers working quite hard on conservation against probably or inheriting management systems that probably weren't ready for that change, our heads came up 10 years later and realized that not only has conservation systematically failed, well, not to criticize, but not to conserve. It's worked in conserving, but not in recovering in nature. And because of its lack of joined up thinking and the fact that it's about everybody, and I could continue another 20 years here doing some quite good things, but if they're not connected to a wider thing. And I'm sort of also fascinated by mapping. I haven't got the pedigree that you have in them, but I did history, and of course maps pretty much drove everything going back over hundreds of years. And it seems that only recently we've, as farmers, but I'm thinking of, but also as householders and don't look far over the hedge, at how your landscape might connect. So the map of dreams was this idea that we needed to act as a people of the East as one, and we definitely started with a tapestry that was deliberately idealistic, and slightly illustrative, as in what you might call Imagineering. If we stop farming 100 meters from every watercourse across the whole region, which many people would think would be a good thing, what would that look like, and how much land, if the Wild East's trigger is 20% return to nature over 50 years, how much land would that yield? And similarly, looking through old with other experts, I might say, the old wooded landscape of East Anglia, obviously in the least wooded region of the UK, how would we reconnect those areas? So it was very broad brush, and absolutely we would never pretend anything other than idealistic. But learning from the Dutch, we wanted to paint this illustration of what it could be. And then I was invited to join as an independent, as wearing my Somerleyton hat, to join Water Resources East by Robin, and saw that essentially you are delivering exactly that vision, but with all the scientific pedigree you could possibly throw at it. And it was literally like, I mean, for us anyway, the door being opened. And it's not our work, but I think what's really exciting about us, for us, is that if Wild East is the kind of, the people's movement, as in this idea that everyone's got a stake in nature recovery, whether it's their churchyard, schoolyard, backyard, and all the things we've talked about, up to bigger scale, and which is the kind of bubbly, crackly top layer. It needs to, of course, connect to something meaningful, and what Water Resources East and what you've done with Biodiversa for us is that meaning. It gives credence to the nice ideas, that everyone might have, and yeah, so it's a mirror, we feel, of what we're trying to achieve, but with the pedigree that we just don't have, and it's never set out to have, I might say, but we were just trying to accelerate the sense of we are in this together, we can do this, and 20% was the kind of magic number, which I think science backs crudely, but yeah, so I think I have to say, to answer the second part of the question, I'm not pretending I'm a techie person, and I'm not pretending I'm completely wholly understand the level. Probably I'm at a base level of understanding of what you can do, but I think it would be, and I don't say it just for this call, but I can't see how it can be better. I mean, it seems to be incredibly detailed, going down to very micro. You've got a macro picture, which we just had on screen when I came on, right down to micro, as in literally a ditch at the end of a lane somewhere on the edge of a village in the middle of Norfolk or Suffolk. So for us, the only, I suppose, the thing is making it more universally understood and making people more aware of how to use it. And if Wild East can in any way help with that process, then that's kind of what we see as our job to a degree. But I don't know how it can be bettered, of course, apart from outcomes. Seeing these outcomes over the next, over the years, and getting more and more people in the tent. More and more people accepting it's the right method, and that if we all do it together, it's going to be absolutely the best for nature. It probably is going to lead to the best offsets and the best, more cohesive thinking across the region. And I think we probably all share a view that, and it's not, again, a criticism, but there's this new sense of co-creation and openness, which maybe previously has been a little bit sectorized and a bit insular and a bit silo driven. And so that, is a very exciting part, and one we want to try and help. But I hope that's
Perfect.
kind of about right, about what you wanted from me.
Thank you, Hugh. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. I partly ask you because I felt he's got a good. I like the ambition of Wild East in terms of trying to make this something that people can do with their gardens or their windowsills or whatever it might be. Everyone can pitch in, no matter the skies. And I kind of, that's something that we haven't thought about in huge detail yet in terms of this plan, but I think it's a really important component of it.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing that I would sort of just add to that just very quickly is that you know, a lot of people say to us, a lot of farmers say to us, well, you know, it's all very well, you've got a load of gardeners, but you know, what's the point? As in, that's not important. But actually, well, for Wild East, there's two measurements. There's of course acres, because in the end we do need space and connectivity across a wide landscape, but it's also people, and you know, people is also the other powerful metric. The more people, and after all, these people are funding us, you know, through whatever scheme that we may adopt, elms or countryside stewardship, you know. And I think there's a missing link in giving the action that people take it on their balcony or in their garden might be small, but it's that change, that action that might lead to an unlocking of a whole lot of other things in their lives, but also a better understanding of how that flows through to what we're doing on a larger scale, you know, out in the on the farms and in the wider landscape, which is, and knowledge is a massive missing part, you know, which we're both trying to, in different ways, improve. And you can't love and protect something without at least basic knowledge. So it's kind of vital, I think.
Thanks so much, Hugh. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think we'll move on to Emma now, if that's okay. You've got a minute to talk, Emma?
Hello, I'm here. Somebody stopped my video, so you'll need to start it again if... Aha, there we go. Lovely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I was very sinister, people not wanting to look at my face. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words, Sam. As you know, I'm a great fan of this project, and it's lovely to see your amazing maps coming through and to understand the extraordinary amount of data and work behind those. So well done for that. And I think there's been some really interesting questions and discussions so far on that. What is absolutely music to my ears is the discussions that are going on with DEFRA and understanding how they are really actively thinking about building this plan into the ELMS process. And it's lovely to see the East of England at the forefront of this, actually thinking about, you know, what could be a consistent approach to having an agreed understanding of evidence behind some of the projects that come through on ELMS. And I really hope that, you know, that in the next couple of years, we emerge as really the front runner in this field and are acknowledged on that nationally. So that's certainly my aspiration in that area. It was clearly something that was needed behind the ELMS process, or they wouldn't have been so interested in what you're doing. So that's fantastic to hear. And I completely get the way that granular detail can be used to provide the evidence base for bids and for funding and investment applications. So, you know, I can see how that can work. I can really echo that point that somebody else made about this not being seen as something for which rewilding land is the only option, because obviously one of the things I've been working on a lot with farmers is thinking about ways that we can improve the carbon levels in our productive soils. We can improve how we use that productive land, and we know that actually if we improve the quality of the soils and so on in productive land and its water retention capacity, we will also improve its productivity. So it's a win-win for production. But you know, at the end of the day, this is one of the you know, the bread baskets of England, and we need to keep that going as part of this discussion. I suspect one of the ways to do that, and I suppose this was my main ask in terms of possibly quite a simple thing you could do next, is I think you have got an awful lot of maps at the moment with colours on, and I get what's behind that, but they can look a bit daunting. And I do think adding some case studies in with pictures of landscapes and examples more unpacked real world examples in terms of what could be done would be helpful, and an example around productive agriculture and what this could add to decisions around productive agriculture, I think would be really helpful as part of that. And I think it would also be helpful to pick out your last map, your ta-da summary map. Obviously you can see there are kind of almost priority areas that are priorities across all your three themes, and some narrative around some of those, you know, with where they are, will be helpful. And I think people will understand that the nuance that doesn't mean there aren't priority areas in other places, but it will just give a visualization of what some of those places are that we all need to be looking at in terms of developing projects. I mean, obviously, one of my key aspirations, you know, representing New Anglia LEP, is to see those really big landscape scale projects come through and understand where they are and support them. We're developing at the moment in the LEP an investment plan, which is our high level aspirations in terms of the big regional projects we want to see funded across Norfolk and Suffolk and potentially beyond, where they're on a wider landscape basis. And I would love to be including, you know, a couple of really big landscape scale natural capital interventions as part of that, where they also build in the agri-food sector as well, where I can see the tie-in with farming as well, because, you know, clean growth is our big priority. How can we, and I know there's a moot question about growth, whether we're really going to grow, but certainly, you know, clean prosperity, shall we say, is our key objective. So it's important for us to see where we can become sustainable while still having a fantastic farming base, given all the other challenges that are facing farmers at the same time, of which there are many. But, you know, as said before, hugely endorse the work. Looking forward to seeing some of that characterised in the case studies and a bit more visual narrative around some of the priority places, and then absolutely endorse that point about plan revision. We really need to try to resource updating this pretty regularly in the next few years, not least because if some of your colours change in a better way, but as a result of some of the projects we deliver, wouldn't that be fabulous, and wouldn't that generate more investment? So yeah, we're going to need to try and do that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Emma. That was really helpful. Part of the reason I was so keen for you to come speak was because I appreciate you're very good at spotting how to coordinate the opportunities for these big landscape level projects that kind of speak and touch to multiple different sectors. And I love the idea of using this to help kind of inform big projects that will benefit agri-environment, benefit, you know, the food sector, which after all is, you know, critical. And I kind of see this as being most effective if it's a tool to help people do the thing that they want to do better, rather than sort of trying to push them in a different direction. So I would love to see it being a part of that, and trying to figure out how we can make it as useful as possible. I also like the idea of the case studies. I hadn't thought about that, but actually we could go through. I've been trying to look for case studies, but actually we could work through some examples and talk about how you could use it. I'll have to think.
Pictures of actual landscape do help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say they ground it. That's a pun, isn't it? But
very good.
But yeah, they reconnect us to why we're all doing it, I suppose. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
There's some great examples and there's some great projects out there. We've just had the Wending Beck project near Durham mentioned in the chat. So there are, and you know, we're aware of a number of projects that are being led through our fantastic ENGOs, through individual landowners, whatever. I think I love that idea, Emma, bringing this to life and putting some photos and starting to map some of the projects and you know, the group. We've got 80 people on the call today. Now the ideas that members have got, you know, contributors have got today, mapping some of these into some places and say, look, this is what we're doing here already. It's a great idea, Emma. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I would love it if this then becomes a way of measuring effectiveness and change over time. That's yeah, highly ambitious, but very, very cool. Jeff, so we've got Jeff Knott from the RSPB. Jeff works across, I think, most of the WRE region and coordinates lots of different projects. So we thought you'd come as a good plate spinner to talk about your thoughts on how this might be used and how we might make it better.
Thanks, Sam. Plate spinning. I'll take my glasses off first of all because they annoyingly reflect the screen, so you haven't got to look at yourself in my glasses reflection. See, the question sort of you posed, Sam, was what we'll use this for, what we think, how we think it can be used, and how it could be improved. And I have to say, when I sort of first started thinking about what I might say in response to that, my initial thoughts were all around sort of the very practical things we could do, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But I think probably the most useful, most valuable use of this tool is around the ambition that it sets out. One of the very first things you said was we set a really big ambition because that's what people said they wanted. And I think that's a really important reminder to bring us back to, because Hugh is absolutely right. We've won some battles and we've done some great things, but in terms of conserving nature and conserving natural capital, all we have been able to do for all of the huge effort and energy that's been put in is we've bent the curve of decline. We've slowed it a bit, but we haven't stopped it and we haven't begun to turn it round. And we're facing a nature and climate emergency. And I think that we all agree that we therefore need to be more impactful, not just to do more, but to be clever about how we do it. And this comes back to the fact that it's had various different names over the years, but basically it always comes back to the Lawton principles, doesn't it? We want bigger, we want better, we want more joined up. It's been badged in various different ways, but simply that's what we want to achieve. And what we've been given through this work is a tool to help us do that. Not just in terms of the mechanics of it, but in terms of the empowerment. One of the things I really love is the different scales that you can view this at. So I cover all of the water resources, East area, and indeed a chunk of other land as well. So I can look at a regional level and think about how we can coordinate projects, how we can get that join up between things that RSPB are involved in, other ENGOs are involved in, things that New Anglia are involved in, private landowners, businesses like Anglian Water, and think about how we can get that join up most efficiently. It helps us think at bigger scales because that's the kind of thing that we all say we want to do, but it's bloody hard to think at the scale that we need to think at, and it's even harder when it comes to acting. So we think about scale and we might get up as far as a particular river system, a catchment, when really, to give an East of England example, we need to be thinking about the whole of the east coast of the country, from the Humber to the Thames, is facing basically the same set of challenges. And we need to be thinking at that scale. And I think this kind of technique can help us join up those dots and build up those genuine landscape scale interventions so that we can build up packages of work that are investable for big business, that we can be sure that where we are taking action, it is having the biggest possible bang for our buck. And ultimately, the most important thing, whatever scale, whether it's the micro scale in people's gardens or the macro scales across the region, that what we are doing is having absolute maximum possible impact. Now, it's really important for the RSPB because we're supported primarily by donations from our members and supporters, whether that's through membership or visiting one of our reserves. And we need to be able to make the case to our members that every pound they give us is delivering the best possible outcome against the mission of saving nature. But equally, there are difficult trade-offs in all of this. Landscapes have many different uses. And I think what's really powerful here is it can take us away from the frequently had but somewhat tiresome debates around nature versus business, or business versus farming, or climate change adaptation versus protecting communities, or even like the quasi-philosophical debates about is something or is something not productive agriculture or rewilding, and what do these terms mean. They're all interesting debates, but I think this tool is one that can help us get away from that into actually getting big stuff done, whether and particularly in partnership, bringing those different sectors together. And that can be across whole regions like the soft east coast and the wetlands associated with that, or around particular development. So for example, Anglian Water's discussions around a Fens reservoir and what that could mean. Now, done well, that could be amazing. It could solve winter flooding issues in the Ouse washes. It could create new habitat for wildlife, and it could be done in a way that allows people to access it and build on the green infrastructure of the Fens region. Done badly, it could tip the dial in the opposite direction for all of those things. And this gives us an evidence-based place to have those discussions. But I come back to where I start. I think the one way I think it can be improved, and it's brilliant. And for anyone who hasn't had the joy of working with Sam, I hope you don't mind me taking just a moment, Sam, just to say that it's actually been a joy to work with you on this. You're that rare thing, a consultant who actually seems to be motivated by making the world better. Not to pour scorn on consultants as a whole, but actually you're quite prepared to admit what you don't know and how things can be improved, and you're constantly seeking to improve the technique to make things better on the ground, and that's been an absolute breath of fresh air. I agree with what Emma was saying around landscapes, and I wonder whether artists' impressions are a good tool here. People really care about the landscapes that they're in, and you may have seen those sliding photos that you see often on news sites a bit quite regularly these days, where it shows you what it is and you drag your cursor to the other side and it reveals what it could be in the future, so that people can get behind the imagery and the emotion of what we're delivering here, because this is a very science-led process. This is a very scientific, evidence-led approach, and that's absolutely right. But what people care about often is much more based in emotion than evidence. And I wonder whether that artistic element added to this scientific underpinning could really bring people's emotions to the fore and help them realize what that big ambition is. Because to come back to where I started, as I said, we've bent the curve of biodiversity decline, but in a nature and climate emergency, we need to do better. It's just for all the huge amount of efforts that people on this call have done and many others across the country, it's completely true that there are fewer species, fewer birds, fewer animals, fewer plants at the end of every year of all of our lives than there were at the start. Hell, there are fewer individual animals and birds across our region when we started talking, when we finished now, than when we started talking. We're bending the curve of decline, but we need to do so much more. And I think what we've got here is a fantastic tool to help us doing that. And yet there's more we can do, and we need to keep reviewing it and make sure we improve it. But actually, I think it's on all of us to make sure that we are perhaps stepping out of our organizational silos and thinking about how we can work together much more efficiently across bigger landscapes to deliver on that big ambition that we now know for sure people really want to see.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Jeff. I might put that quote on the website if you don't mind. That's extremely helpful. That's a really, really good direction for how to, really take this forward. I'm really pleased that you find it so useful. I really hope it does help people think about things in these big connected ways. So I'm going to move on to the next bit, which is going to be talking about feedback. But as I do that, I'm going to answer a question from Matthew Bullock, because it's extremely pertinent and it beautifully segues into what I'm about to talk about. So thank you, Matthew. Matthew's asked, he said the map, well, his second question is a bit unfocusing actually, which is that he's struck by the lack of actions in the peatland fens. So this has raised an extremely important point. This iteration we're showing you is the first iteration. We're going to need your feedback in order to spot mistakes, spot things that are wrong. And these might have come from the data we've used or the targets we've set or a bunch of places to come from, and correct them and kind of go through and figure out how to make this better and more reflective of what you want. And that particular issue, I suspect it might come from the fact that peatland is fantastic farmland, which means that that's going to have a very high cost in terms of the cost effectiveness of it. So the analysis will seek to kind of avoid those. And it may be that we haven't set the targets high enough, so it's avoided them too much, too effectively, and actually missed out on a critical opportunity. And if that's the case, amazing, tell us. Let's use that information so we can go through and figure out how to resolve it. Which brings me on to, we're going to ask you a lot of questions, and Matthew's raised his hand. Do you want to say something, Matthew? You've raised your hand as I picked you out. I'll allow you to talk. Do you want to say something?
Yes, I want to just come back to the question that Katie Thornborough asked. When you get involved in these areas, as I have recently, there are three conflicting or kind of complementary objectives. One is to increase biodiversity, which is very much the focus of what you're talking about now. The second is to deal with climate change and carbon sequestration. And the third, which we aren't talking about particularly today, is public access. To answer Katie's question, if you look at the issues of carbon sequestration and dealing with carbon change, the map of where carbon change needs to happen is a very different map from a map which shows how, if you wish to get carbon sequestration, you can most successfully do that. By and large, biodiversity is not terribly good at getting carbon sequestration. It's very slow, and the numbers involved in terms of, say, peatland are very slow. About 1 centimetre a year, whereas you're talking about potentially 37 tons of CO2 emission per hectare from intensive peatland farming. I think you need to bring those two things together in this map, because I think that the raising of the bar this week by the government on carbon emissions is really going to focus a great deal of the debate in nature on where do you deal with the carbon emissions before you get to the biodiversity. And the smart piece will be if you can put those two things together.
Right, I see. So you're saying that the rate of carbon emissions from degrading peat soils considerably outweighs the rate of carbon sequestration from restoring them. So actually the quickest win is by reducing emissions and then moving on to restoration.
Yeah, well, not then. You've got to combine two.
Yeah, sure.
But you've got to start to show. So to answer Katie's point, as she's a politician, she'll be under pressure to show how they're cutting the carbon footprint of Cambridge.
Yeah.
And that looks very different from the carbon footprint, or from the footprint you would have from trying to maximize biodiversity.
Okay, this is an extremely good point. I will raise this with our planners and see if we can find, basically the answer is if we can find spatial data to represent it, we can probably include it. And that does sound like something we could probably figure out. What I will do is I will take a note of that, and then we'll deal with that in the next iteration. Thank you, that was really helpful. So moving on, critical to achieving this is getting feedback like we just received in order to refine this. This is absolutely a discussion. This is absolutely about going through and making this better and spotting these mistakes and raising things like avoiding carbon loss through peat soils as well as sequestration. So the main lesson we've had from the process so far is that everybody provides feedback in a different way. I've had calls, forms, emails, documents, meetings. I had a lovely conversation with a farmer in wetlands whilst carrying my son through the woods once, and which was genuinely informed how I was approaching this. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that people want to express their concerns and critiques and support in different ways. So what I want to do is provide as many opportunities for people to guide us as possible. I'm going to talk you through some of the key areas of discussion, the topics that I think we need to talk about as a group, as a portion of the country, I guess, and then I'll come back to this topic in just a second. So with that sort of context, think about that as we go through this. I'm going to be asking you some questions to you now. So first is, oh, you're right. There is 912 hectares of established ancient woodland. Thank you. We'll come back to that in a minute. We want you to help set the targets. So we want you to help figure out what is an appropriate number for these targets. Where should we actually put them at? And I think there are two key questions here, which is how high do you want the targets overall to be for the zones, conserve, restore, establish? We drew from the 25-year plan, but look, that's not the only game in town. So if you think that's wrong, or if you think that there's actually you've interpreted it in a different way or whatever, or you just have your own thoughts, then we'd really like to hear that. And the other question is, what targets do you want for each habitat within each zone? So how should we tweak the dials? Maybe All right, we just heard the importance of peatland. Maybe we want to increase the wetland habitats and the habitats that represent peatland, increase the numbers in terms of establish and restore and conserve. So on that, with Nancy, I think it's time if we could do poll 1, that would be helpful.
Yep. I'm the poll master today. Okay, poll number 1. I'm just launching now. We're going to give you about 30 seconds or so to reply.
Yeah, so poll 1, fantastic, I can see it too. It's basically, how would you like to provide feedback on the targets? So some people won't want to participate, which is totally fine. They might feel it's not their wheelhouse. And then the other options really are, do you want to like specifically go through and comment on the numbers, or would you like to, or is actually you got like a, sorry, is it, would you like to talk about all the targets, or are there actually specific ones that you care about?
Give it a few more seconds. Do you want me to share the results as well, Sam, after?
That would be great.
Yeah, when the poll's ended.
Or let people do it. I realise that me talking, I can never read something if someone's talking, so I can probably just shut up and let people read it. Cool, that'll do nicely. Can you end it and share it?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Great. So I think what we take from that is that my previous point about there being lots of different people who have lots of different takes on this is pretty much spot on. So I think what this tells us is we need to provide people with a way of commenting on all if they're interested in commenting on all, but also picking out specific ones easily if there's one that's dear to their heart. Awesome. Do you want to do poll number 2?
Yep.
So this is about how involved you want to get. So what we've done in some instances is allow people to identify which habitats they want in high, medium or low categories, whilst in other cases people want to actually get in there and change numbers. My God, this is so useful. I'm so pleased with doing this. This is much easier than me just trying to guess. Fantastic. I think that's probably
Yep.
yeah, if you want to end it and share it. Amazing. So what we got was the majority is people who want to group into categories such as high, medium and low, and then about a quarter of people want to get into the actual numbers. Fantastic. So I think what this tells us is I'll set up a sort of a main system for grouping them into high, medium and low, allowing people to do that, but then I'll supplement this with actually showing the tables. I think what we'll probably do, to be honest, is put an Excel spreadsheet out there, and then people can use that if they actually want to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but then we'll have a sort of more simplified, streamlined, accessible online form for the high, medium, low, so that you can kind of pick your stream basically and go with that. Awesome, thanks Nancy.
No worries.
Can we close the poll? Sorry, can you close the poll? It's still sharing. Right, well, I'll just minimize it for now. Partly because, so I now have some questions for you about communicating the plan, because obviously like a big part of this is how do you make it useful? How do you make it actually something you can pick up and easily understand? And I kind of just wanted to get some thoughts really. We're aware that there are a lot of different uses for the plan, probably many more than I'm actually even capable of thinking up. So point number 3, if you will, Nancy, is basically the question is how might you use the natural capital plan? Now I've brainstormed some options here, but if I have totally missed the point and your option isn't on there, please add it in the chat because I'd love to hear about it. Oh, and John Pennell, if you want to add something in there, I don't think we could do free text on this because of the way it's done. But if you have comments, stick them in the chat, and I'll read them out. Very interested to hear about Councillor Pippa Haling's work they've commissioned on carbon and biodiversity. Sounds like there's a conversation to be had there, actually, Pippa. Yeah, that'd be really useful. Fantastic. Do you want to stop and share it? So again, I think the results are that it's actually everything. People are going to use this in multiple different ways. And actually what we're going to have to do is make sure this is something that provides the detail and the specificity, but is as broadly useful and easily adaptable as humanly possible. Fantastic. It's slightly intimidating that I was almost hoping that it would come back as a simple answer, but no, I thought it was going to be embrace the complexity. So question number 4 is, what forms of information would be most useful for you? Because obviously there's maps, and then there's spreadsheets, and there's data by parish, and there's all these different bits of it. What would people like to have access to? What would be most useful? Fantastic, thank you. And for the others, if you stick them in the chat, then that would be really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, okay. John Pennell's point about pre-planning with parishes. Okay, we've got Rachel Gibbs has said another use here is to assist work for evidence for local plan. Alan Woods has said another use is to map opportunities 100 meters either side of the watercourse. Oh yeah, right, okay. So which actions are identified near watercourses? So yeah, okay, that's really sensible. Hadn't thought about that. Rachel Gibbs would like a map at district level. Fantastic. Awesome. So I think the people are particularly interested in maps for specific habitats or ecosystem services. That's really interesting. I'm going to have to figure out how we can do this. I think probably what this is telling us is we're going to need to have a phase 2 of this, or seek to have a phase 2, where we try to kind of put out as many of these different uses as possible. That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And then poll number 5. Sorry about the endless questions. It's just this is extremely helpful for like guiding what we do next. So I'll pester you with, I've got this one and 2 more, and then I'm done. I'll answer some of your questions again. There we go. Poll number 5. How would you like to access the plan? What would be the most useful way of accessing it? In terms of, I've got a question here from AW Alston about, do you have a makeup of who's voting on these questions, and are they a true example of what the public want? They're anonymous, so I don't know who's voting for what. And in terms of the public, we're obviously Water Resources East. The nature of working at a regional level is you need to be able to work with people who also kind of operate in this space, and that tends to mean you work with organizations rather than individuals, who then of course represent the public in a multitude of different ways. County Council, for example, directly represents them. I saw a councillor speaking on there. She very literally represents people who are elected to. So I think that what we're using is the input and thoughts of people who are well positioned to speak for wider populations as best we can, basically. Fantastic. Do you want to share this one?
I think just to add, Andrew, I mean, just looking through the list of participants, we've got a really good cross-reference, really diverse group of WRE members here today, which is fantastic. So yeah, really good diversity and good, yeah, which is great.
Fantastic. So the lead one was an interactive map of the parishes and zones. That's come out really high. But then also we've got data about the area of suggested habitat within each zone for specific parishes or areas. Cool. Okay. But also, to be honest, a bit of everything. So I will. I feel like almost the main result is whether there's a multiple choice, we get a pretty even split across the lot of them, and certainly significant numbers in all of them. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Right. So last two questions. So this is one we mentioned earlier. So I've kind of been fairly brief in overviewing this because there's so much to cover, but there is scope for having a webinar run by CISO and Julia where they actually go into the like fine detail of how they did this, because there's a lot of real methodological rigor behind all this, and that would be the sort of thing that, to be entirely frank, I probably wouldn't understand most of it, but I appreciate that a lot of you out there do have like serious technical ability, and are going to want to ask questions like like for example the question about carbon. So would you be interested in that? Would people be interested in a webinar that goes into this kind of fine detail stuff? Strong yes is the answer. Strong yes. Okay. Cool. Awesome. I think you can share that one. Nancy. Answer is yes. Overwhelming yes. There's a few people who are not so keen on it, but cool. Well, that's the thing we'll do then. I'll speak to CISO and Julia and we will arrange something because that is clearly important. And then the last question is, we appreciate that a lot of different people are going to have a lot of different things to say. So this question is about how you'd like to provide feedback. And I suspect I know the answer already, which is going to be all of the above. But I just wanted to kind of put it out there just to gauge the relative interest. Amazing. If you want to share that, then Nancy. So online questionnaire came as a favourite, but then a lot of people want to have a chat and an email. I think as with the others, I'll try and make sure we provide. Well, I will make sure that we provide options for doing all of these. Anyone who wants a conversation can just flat out email me, sam@biodiversify.org, and I'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible. Although I am going on holiday next week, so it might come back slightly delayed. But yeah, always happy to chat. And I think the key is going to be developing an online questionnaire that's effective and allows people to articulate themselves. Again, with emails, specific queries, that's really powerful as well. So always happy to receive those. Amazing. Okay, so right. So the last minor thing here is the map is great, but what do we do first? Like, what do we, what's the first thing we should be doing? This plan is for a 30-year horizon in line with the water plan. But we're aware that obviously if you're doing something immediately, that you actually might need some more help in terms of figuring out what the first priority should be. So I raised this with CISO yesterday, and she said that there are in fact quite a detailed methodological approaches for phasing the outputs of systematic conservation planning, so identifying what you should do in what order in order to get towards the outcomes. And it's a lot of it's in the scientific literature. So I haven't done this before. I'm not sure if CISO has. I think she has. In fact, I know she has. I just wanted to raise this as I think it's a really important issue, and largely say this is something we'll talk about at the next iteration, because I think it's going to be a critical aspect to this to make it really practical. But I want to make sure we do it properly, and I want to make sure we do it basically drawing off the scientific literature so that we do it in a robust, defensible way. Right, let's move back to questions. We've got another half hour, and I will basically answer anything you throw at me until then. Oh, hello, Robin.
I'll read them out. Give you a bit of breathing space.
Thank you.
So, fantastic. So, yeah, brilliant set of questions. There's quite a lot going on in the chat as well. Useful conversation around the ancient woodland piece, around kind of connection and around restoration, planting the right species mix, and then connecting fragmented landscapes. So that's really helpful. Thank you to Neil Jarvis for that. So just a question from Ken Otter around the 2022 as the date of public involvement. When will any funding become available for projects such as the work being researched and done by the Welland River Trust to improve the biodiversity from source to sea? The 2022 date is the date for kind of publication of WRE's first draft regional plan for consultation. We're already working on projects. There are projects happening already, and if there are, we are very keen and very interested to be part of partnerships and conversations and support with funding applications, and just work together in partnerships now. We're already involved in a whole range of partnerships and projects up and down the country, either as funding, we've got the funding, or we provide a letter of support or whatever. So Ken, just don't hang on. If there's some ideas and you think this can be used, or WRE can support and add some value, or other partners, then please get in touch. We'd be delighted to help now. Yeah, no need to wait till 2022, definitely. Comment from John Pennell: agree the most things should happen at parish level. So what is sort of preliminary work that an organisation such as Norfolk ALC, Association of Local Councils in Norfolk, can get involved with to start bringing together kind of farmer landowner conversations with residents, so to avoid a perception of a divide that's developed over recent years? What would you advise, Sam?
That's an interesting question. It's a good one. This is a really interesting one. I'm not honestly sure I'm that well equipped to speak to it. So I think that there are a range of options. I think one of the nice things that this plan produces is identifying the kinds of things you could do at a parish level that would make a significant contribution. And I think that is quite a nice place to start, is kind of going, look, at this parish we have 10 hectares of peat we could restore. We have 3 hectares of woodland we could plant and repair areas to reduce flooding. I guess I would, wherever you have divides, I would see this tool as being something that can help as an enabler, going, this is how we fit within our wider landscape. And it's also generally good stuff, which is trying to get money to do environmental things. How can we get together to make this happen? So I guess I would see this as trying to support that, but I'm also aware that I'm not an expert in terms of how to work at a parish level. I tend to work more at the strategic level. So that would be my suggestion, but
And a good, I think you've frozen, Sam. Sorry. So
I would need to bow to greater experts on the topic. I think some. Sorry, I just realised something also would be quite cool is identifying whether there are parishes that have particularly important. So where you are in, multiple zones, or there's a lot of area in the zone, and kind of pulling out and going, actually, recognising we are a particularly important parish. What might we do? Sorry, go on, Robin.
No, sorry, yeah, you broke up then a little bit. So just a really important point that the NFU, in a conversation in Norfolk, the Strategic Flood Alliance meeting yesterday, John, the NFU, Rob Weiss, and the NFU just has offered the help to kind of just to bridge any perceived divide between gaps. So a lot of yeah, if this can bring some conversations together usefully, then that's great, isn't it? Next question, great question from Sharatos Zapitis. I like the analysis of mapping the potential options for environmental protection, identifying each area's percentage importance. Have we taken into consideration the different ecosystem types, and is connectivity considered as a factor in the analysis, Sam?
Yes. So the targets are set according to the potential for either conserving, restoring, or establishing. Connectivity is a key factor in SCP. It will always seek to create basically Lawton principles, and a key amongst that is more connected. So the Lawton principles basically underpin the SCP analysis, and they are kind of hardwired into how it works, really. So yes, basically, is the simple answer.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Not a question, but just an observation, a comment from Brendan, who's the Chief Executive of Essex and Southwark Rivers Trust. Yeah, great. Thank you, Brendan, for offering some good case studies. Certainly, yeah, and particularly looking at Norfolk Wildlife Trust. We've got some connections into Wendling Beck, obviously. I have colleagues on the call today, but also connections through Norfolk Rivers Trust and the Wildlife Trust, and also the Nature Conservancy who are also involved in that as well. So really helpful. And yeah, we take note that yeah, projects very challenging, expensive, take a long time to achieve their objectives. Absolutely. So yeah, we'll take your advice and your soundings, Brendan, on this, which is fantastic. Question from Archie Ruggles-Bryce at Spain's Hall Estates. Thank you. So how will WRE ensure that the outputs of this work are offered up proactively to other groups who are drawing up their own spatial prioritization mapping? It's unlikely to be sufficient to expect them to come to you in all cases, so a mechanism to actively enable them to use this work, but also to refine the WRE work to fit in different priorities as they arise. Yeah, really, again, really good question. Something we are kind of working on. Sam's kind of mentioned has kind of trailed a phase 2 of this project. So our current funding for this work kind of finishes at the end of June. Very grateful for our grant from WWF and the Coca-Cola Foundation. So we are looking to kind of form, this is a bit of the what next I was going to finish on, but looking to form a kind of a steering group, a kind of a subgroup of members of this group, and use some of the questions here to kind of articulate and shape a phase 2. One of which importantly has got to be that this doesn't just sit on a WRE website, WRE database, or a report on a shelf somewhere, that actually all of this is made publicly available and is made available to stakeholders. But we've got to work through the practicalities of this, but that's absolutely our aim and our aspirations. This is a tool that is used across the region in as many different ways as possible. So yeah, absolutely have my commitment from WRE. I'm sure Sam's commitment from Biodiversify, that this is all about sharing this and exploiting this in a certain way. But as we've seen from some of the questions, Sam, we are, there's the questions on the polls that Sam has posed, we're exploring the ways that we can do that, but we're going to need your input in terms of, well, what are the opportunities? How do we make this accessible at X scale, Y scale, Z scale, or whatever, to make this truly useful and accessible? So yeah, thank you, Archie. A comment interview from Matthew. Bullet danger in creating maps that are disconnected from the opportunity costs for those that own the land. So one of the reasons why there is so little nature in the region is that capital opportunity cost of change for landowners is so high. So there's a risk of creating high expectations that will run into economic issues rather rapidly. So can we start to factor in the opportunity cost of land use change into this mapping process?
So I think we have. So we've included the opportunity costs both in terms of taking land out of production, but also the opportunity costs, the actual costs of going out and changing the land use, so planting trees or changing management or whatever. If there are any other factors that you think we should be considering that we're not, I'd be very happy to hear it. Obviously, it's something that we need to be able to manage at some, to include the data for at some level. So I suspect some of what you're talking about is if a small farm takes land out of production, then they might have an opportunity cost in terms of their materials and their tools and their tractors and all that kind of stuff. There might be a cost involved in changing your usage of that, and that probably can't consider because it's so individually specific. But I think we've been pretty good at representing the opportunity costs in other forms.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So, but Matthew, perhaps we'll pick up on this. We're in kind of regular dialogue through Cambridge Ahead. So let's pick up on this if we may.
Yeah. And if we've missed something, happy to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep this. This is today is a primer for discussion. What do you like? What don't you like? What needs improving? What more do you want to see? Let's start this dialogue. Let's kick the tires on this process, which is great. A question in the chat from John Ballum, and again a really good question. So how do we intend to communicate the role and purpose of the plan to stakeholders in areas where there already natural capital plans, either in existence or about to be published. For example, in Bedfordshire. So Bedfordshire's a long way ahead in terms of some of this thinking, which is fantastic. And how do we make sure the work is complementary and doesn't confuse stakeholders, particularly when we start to get down to kind of parish level landowner or farmers? So yeah, how does this knit in together with kind of existing maps and natural capital planning work that's gone before us, Sam?
So we are very actively engaging anyone who is developing any natural capital plan in Eastern England. I think we're kind of helped with this by the fact that obviously the Rivers Trust sit on the WRE board, and they're the ones doing a lot of this kind of stuff. The county level, of course, everyone's slightly well, there's been a lot of plans which have been in discussions about, but in many ways, I think the LNRSs with the Environment Bill will really kick this off. There'll be a whole wave of those. Basically, it's like consistent effort, really. There's no like one answer. It's about speaking to people wherever there's an opportunity, or wherever they are developing a plan, to make sure we're conscious of them and supporting them. But then I think it's also the other end of it in terms of making our outputs easily accessible. So if someone wants to develop a plan and doesn't want anything to do with this, which would be completely acceptable, they can pick up this tool and figure out how to use it to support whatever it is they're trying to do.
I think Sam, you and I are engaged in some really helpful county-based conversations, aren't we? For example, in Norfolk with the Water Management Plan, most recently with Cambridgeshire. So I think yeah, to continue to engage with county stakeholders. Not unhelpful that WRE's incoming chair is Dr. Paul Leinster, who's on the call today, which is fantastic, and yeah, is leading is the chair of the local nature partnership in Bedfordshire as well. So every county is different, every parish is different, every district is different. So again, we just want, this is, if this is not a one size fit all, then let's explore that, but let's do that. This comes in the, how do we take this? This is a regional view. How do we take this down into the next level of unit? What is that planning unit for the conversation that we need to have? So yeah, we'll keep going. Great, interesting, useful example of parish led from Councillor Pippa Halings in the Peterborough area. Not being tried in, so yeah, just a manual nature recovery toolkit for parish council. So again, maybe if we can pick that up with you, Pippa, just to understand some more about that, and yeah, and pick that up through our conversations with Natural Cambridgeshire. I know Helen's on the call today. Helen died from Natural Cambridgeshire, so yeah, perhaps we can pick that up in a Cambridgeshire conversation. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all the questions from the chat. Now Higson, yeah, just from Thetford Rivers Group, how confident are we that the rapidly changing real-time costs in agriculture, as impacted by the increased periods of dry weather or flooding, are up to date?
Lordy, not very. We're using the best information we have. So the data from Natural England's Fair is pretty recent. The data from CH, I think, is pretty recent. The data from Knight Frank, we had a whole conversation with Knight Frank about how they got their data, and I think it's really solid. Part of the problem with some of this stuff is that, I mean, just to give you an illustration, agricultural land changes hands very rarely, which means there isn't like a database you can look at. Like, you can't go onto Rightmove for fields and look at how much houses sold, fields sold for in your area. Which means it's quite difficult to kind of accurately predict these things. So what Knight Frank have done is gone through and spoken to land managers and people who are actually on the ground and asked them to estimate the cost of, what would a field of a certain number of hectares sell for in your area at different grades. So they've used expert elicitation to develop that data. So the methods we've used are robust, but it's only as good as the data that we can access. So I suspect this will be a thing that will change. I mean, certainly if we were to iterate this in 7 years, and there's been a whole, the water resource management plan has come out and there's a change in paradigm, I suspect there will be a change in this, and something to keep an eye on. So yeah, this is a really important point, and we'll have to keep a finger on the pulse, I think, is the main answer I can give to that.
Brilliant. I'm not seeing too many more comments or questions in the Q&A, Sam. I mean, just another comment from John Pennell around, water is key in Norfolk, absolutely. And what we're looking to do is make sure that this work links in with kind of the Norfolk County Council's local nature recovery strategy. Sam and I are sitting down with John Jones tomorrow for Norfolk County Council, or later this week, sorry. We're linking this, so how do we use this work with the work we're doing with the Nature Conservancy in terms of the water fund and some of the investment stuff. So we're trying to, there's lots of pieces of a jigsaw here that we're trying to pull together, and yeah, there's a lot going on in Norfolk, as you know. So and great to have you involved in terms of your link to parish councils, which is fantastic. So really appreciate your comments there. So another question from, so just a comment from Matthew Bully. You can get gross margin per hectare per crop and soil types and DEFRA surveys, and in some cases AHDB. So that's really helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, very helpful. Okay.
Hi.
Well, Sam, that's probably it for Q&A as far as I can see. So do you want to close?
Sure. I would love to go and collapse. I just wanted to kind of close on the point that a lot of the questions have been asked are so helpful, and it's really pleased that so many of you have attended and filled out the surveys as we've gone through this, the polls, but incredibly helpful. And I guess the point I'd want to close on is that in some cases, the questions that you're asking are great questions, and I kind of feel like you know the answer better than me. The questions about how do we get parishes to help them engage. Clearly, there's a lot of work going on here that, frankly, I don't know that much about, but I'm really keen to learn. And I'm really keen to figure out how could parishes where they have historic conflicts use this to kind of develop plans and move forward? How could you use toolkits to help support people and give them the guide to action? And I think that kind of this is what we make of it, this tool. If there is opportunities to kind of make something that individual parishes can support action on a parish level, and that might be our website or a bunch of different options really. Get in touch. Let's have that chat. Let's use your expertise to make sure that the thing that comes out of this is tailored to help you do the thing you want to do. I think that's my main takeaway point. And thank you very much. Basically,
I think that's how I'd like to kind of just close. It's just 900. I've just written down this 945 individual actions, which is fantastic. So we kind of set out on this journey. About 6 months ago now, Sam, didn't we? And blown away by the response, which is fantastic. So thank you very much. I and the WRE team also don't have answers at all, and we are only as good as the conversation that we're having. So thank you very much for a really good set of questions. Thank you for participating in the polls. I think those polls are really insightful in terms of what next over this project. I would very much like to, whilst we kind of finish off and don't want to divert Sam and the team too much away, but we do want to start thinking around what a phase 2 project would look like. So there are some obvious candidates from some of the organisations and people who have kind of contributed this afternoon and made comments. So there might be, I'll be putting a call out, or we'll be putting a call out for just a conversation, just a bit of a brainstorm with a smaller group of organisations about what a phase 2 project might look like. And the most obvious thing is, how do we scale this down, from region back down to X unit, whatever that might be. So that's the next thing we will do. There'll be, how many more webinars have we got, Sam? What's the plan with webinars?
So we will release both a kind of nice glossy document that includes everything we've spoken about today later this week, as well as systems for providing feedback and allow people to comment on things. I think we'll probably have another webinar in a month's time, and we'll come back with a revised plan based on your feedback. So we'll take your feedback, revise the plan, and take the next steps. That'll probably be end of May, maybe early June. I suspect we'll probably then do another iteration after that. So I think there'll be at least 2 more iterations, and then we'll have to see basically. I suspect then at some point we will have to draw a line under it for the time being and move on to phase 2. Depends on the people we get.
Fantastic. And it's a call for your email address, Sam. So Nancy's helpfully just put Sam's email address, and a link to the website is there. Question from Ed Bramman Jones around when we're going to see maps at local parish or catchment level. I'm saying you're hesitant to, well, they're there, aren't they? I mean, what would you say, Sam, in terms of, are you willing, happy, trust the data to start boiling this down and start enabling an interactive kind of deep dive to look at parishes, or is that part of phase 2 that we need to work out the mechanism to do that?
Yes, that's more phase 2. So what we can share now is like probably spreadsheets of for each parish.
Okay.
You know, what can one do? But that's going to be very much in its raw data form. What I would love is what some people answered in the poll is, you know, something like this where you can click on it and it'll go, this is what you might do in that parish to achieve the things. But that requires, you know, that's quite a lot of work to get to that stage through people who are, you know, website designers, that kind of stuff. In terms of deadline for comments, I haven't set one yet. I think I'll probably be a couple of weeks. I think we might do 3 weeks. I'll have to check in with the team. And sorry, we have complicated flowcharts of Gantt charts and things and timing, so I'll need to do it in such a way that it times up with our planners. But minimum couple of weeks, maximum 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Sam, will it be helpful? Could you maybe, you know, put out a 2 weeks out, kind of a last call for comments kind of thing, and just confirm to organisations and individuals who've joined the webinar, please? Just put out that last call.
Absolutely. Yeah, check your emails, Alan, or watch your emails. There'll be stuff coming out. It'll be in, you know, as far as we can make it.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. So huge thanks, Sam. That's a marathon 2 hours. I hope there is a yes.
Cup of tea. Time for a cup of tea.
Cup of tea, absolutely. Huge thanks to Nancy for another seamless from an IT perspective. Well done, Nancy. I don't know how you do this, so well done.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Granada in Spain. The Spanish office has done fantastically this afternoon. Thank you, WRE. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you very much. Again, a fantastic. We had 82 participants at one point in our peak. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, and we shall see you again soon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, guys.
Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.